a lot of people are very, very interested in the work that you did with the civil trial in the John Benet Ramsey case. How did you become involved in that case, and what was your role, and just kind of tell us about what happened with that and everything, Cina, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. The case was called Wolf versus Ramsey, but many people refer to it as a John Benet Ramsey civil case. And I was contacted by an attorney who represented Chris Wolf. And at the time, Mr. Wolf was a freelance reporter. And it was my understanding that Mr. Wolf and his live-in girlfriend had a disagreement on Christmas Day in 1996. And Mr. Wolf left their apartment that evening, and the next morning, between that time, he returned and went to bed and went to sleep. His girlfriend got up and started watching TV that day. It was a day after Christmas, and she saw on the news that a young girl named John Benet Ramsey had been killed on the evening of Christmas Day. And she thought that since her boyfriend, Mr. Wolf, had left the apartment that night, he must have killed John Benet. So she contacted the Boulder Police Department, and she notified them. And, of course, the Boulder Police Department, they were following all leads. And Mr. Wolf was brought in for questioning. At one point, he had even given DNA sample and even handwriting samples. And later, Mr. Wolf was cleared of having any involvement in John Benet's murder. But in 2001, which is 5 years after John Benet had been murdered and years after Mr. Wolf had been cleared by the police, John and Patsy Ramsey, who's John Benet's parents, they published a book titled Death of Innocence. And in that book, the parents declared that Mr. Wolf was a viable suspect in John Benet's death. In addition, the family website published a sketch by a psychic, and the psychic sketch rendered an image of someone who looked like Mr. Wolf. And the psychic, I think, if I remember correctly, commented that this is what the killer looked like. And so the statement was also made after Mr. Wolf had been cleared by authorities. So knowing all of this, and a lot of other people knowing this, it was difficult for Mr. Wolf to get a job, considering he was a freelance reporter. So he sued for libel. And that's how the case started. And the attorney that contacted me had spoken to other forensic handwriting experts, and no one wanted to touch this high-profile case. And he asked me if I would be interested in reviewing a copy of the ransom note and known handwriting samples of Patsy Ramsey. And, you know, to me, this was the most well-known case involving handwriting since the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. And I wondered why other handwriting experts didn't want to look at this case. But I did, and in the end, I was able to compare the ransom note writing to Patsy Ramsey's handwriting, and also to John Ramsey's writing, and to Mr. Wolf's writing. And there are many other suspects in the case that the Boulder Police Department were able to clear as suspects through their handwriting. But it was reported that John Ramsey's handwriting did not match the writing of the ransom note, and Patsy Ramsey's handwriting had some similarities to the ransom note, and I believe that she could not be ruled out. But with my analysis, I was able to rule out John. I ruled out Mr. Wolf's writing. But with Patsy's handwriting, I found over 254 significant similarities between her writing and the ransom note. And I produced a written report with 44 pages of exhibit charts which demonstrate what these similarities are. And that's how I got involved in the case, and that's what I did with the case.
Wow. Again, we have somebody else on the line that would like to talk with you. Let's go to area code 757. You are on the line with with Cina Wong. If you have a question, you can go ahead now.
Okay. Cina, I have a technical question. I'm right-handed. And I know if I try to write left-handed, it's pretty unrecognizable. What about people that are ambidextrous that can go both ways with writing? Is there a significant difference in their handwriting, and can you tell the difference if they try to disguise it or write a different way like that?
Oh, that's a real good question. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, handwriting comes from your brain. So even though your dominant hand is your right one, if you try to sign your signature with your left hand, you're still going to emulate the same movements that you that you do with your right hand without having to think about it. But it's going to be a lot messier. It's going to feel very awkward, but it's a great exercise to do. With people who are ambidextrous, they have more skill with writing with both hands. And in the case of Patsy Ramsey, she wouldn't exactly admit to being ambidextrous, but people had witnessed her writing with both hands. And she, during this case, I was given over 101 pages of Patsy Ramsey's handwriting that were retrieved by the Colorado Bureau of Investigators. They were either handwritings that she did on a day-to-day basis, or they were handwriting samples that the Colorado Police Department had sat down and requested from her. So that means she actually did it in front of them. They told her to write certain words. They had her write out the ransom note, and they had her do it with both hands. And it was amazing that her handwriting was pretty consistent, even though she was writing with her non-dominant hand, which was her left hand. So it just depends on the person's skill level, and it seems to be a lot easier with people who seem to be artists. I guess they have that right brain, left brain thing going with being artistic. So, but thank you for asking the question.
Well, thank you.
And if you practice more with your left hand, you might become ambidextrous someday.
All right, thank you.
That was a great question. Thank you so much for calling. We do have another caller, someone in the chat room that's asking a question, Cina, and they're asking again, going back to alcohol changing a person's handwriting, which you said it would. What about prescription medication and things such as like pain medication and even depression? What about depression? Would that change someone's handwriting if they're in a depressed state versus being in their normal state? And what about the different types of medications?
Oh, yes. I mentioned medication just briefly a little bit early, but yes, definitely medication can, especially medication that will suppress or cause pain medication causes you to be depressed so you won't feel the pain. But that definitely does affect your handwriting. You'll most likely write slower, sometimes larger writing. It depends on the type of medication. So when I am dealing with cases, for instance, where someone signed their will on their deathbed, I ask, was that person in the hospital at the time? Can you please get the medical records so I can look at the different types of medications? And then I try to get information on each medication to see how it affects the body and interpret how that may affect someone's handwriting. But yes, that definitely happens in a lot of cases of people who are sick or the elderly.